Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Matcha Mornings podcast. I am really excited that you are joining me for today's episode of the show. This week on the podcast, I am joined by Kathy Degen. Kathy is a physiotherapist, an osteopathic manual practitioner, as well as a yoga teacher. Kathy is passionate about incorporating the evidence-based practices of physiotherapy, the holistic approach of osteopathy, and the utilization of yoga and Pilates to empower patients with their own healing. And in this episode, we dive into talking about Kathy's journey with physiotherapy, osteopathy, as well as yoga. And we talk about how she's been able to blend these modalities to truly help her patients heal. We also discuss the power of the mind-body connection and how important this is for healing injuries and pain and so much more. This is a super inspiring conversation and one that I was so grateful to have with Kathy. So I know that you're going to love it as much as I did. So without further ado, here is Kathy. Welcome to the podcast today, Kathy. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to dive in with you. And my first question for you is, where are you joining me from?
I am in Barrie, Ontario, Canada. So it's about an hour north of Toronto.
Amazing. And can you share with listeners just a little bit about what you do and the business that you currently run?
Awesome. Sure. So I guess by qualifications, I'm a physiotherapist and I'm an osteopathic manual practitioner here in Barrie, Ontario. So I became a physio about 25 years ago and then became an osteopathic manual practitioner in 2009. But to be an osteopathic manual practitioner, and I'll explain why it's called that big long name in a minute, it took me about 7.5 years to get that designation. But right from the beginning, I was able to use the techniques incorporated into my practice as a physiotherapist. So I like to say that I have been both for about 25 years at this point.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm curious, like a little bit about your journey with health and wellness and what kind of inspired getting into physiotherapy and osteopathy right off the get-go.
Sure. Well, I guess when I was in high school, I always knew I was going to go into the medical profession of some sort. I started university with my eyesight on going into to becoming a doctor. And then in 1990, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And at that point, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, which, as you know, probably didn't have great prognosis. Now, she did manage to beat that and live for another 24 years after that. But at the time, I took some time off school because I came home thinking that she was not doing well and that she needed some help at home. And so that was kind of my first really introduction to the medical world. Like, I mean, prior to that, like everybody else, you know, there's a glamour, I guess, attached to it. But when she was going through treatment, you know, I went with her to her appointments. I was with her after her treatments. And it kind of changed my whole perspective of health and well-being, really. And it was interesting because my dad at that time, he was an accountant, but he delved a lot into mind body, even though he didn't call it that. I'm of Chinese heritage. And so he would bring in philosophy, the Chinese medicine and Qigong and energy work, but he didn't even realize that he was doing that. And he spent a lot of time with my mom working on her mindset. And I truly believe that that was one of the reasons why she did so well with such a dire prognosis back then. And then after that, I changed my mind about what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what I wanted to do after that. But I had a job working with disabled adults, running a camp, providing them an experience, 2 weeks away from the homes that they were living in, out in nature, and just, we had a lot of fun. And from that point, I decided to go into physiotherapy, thinking that I would work with spinal cord injuries. But at that point, I got married and moved to Barrie after I graduated, and there wasn't an opportunity to work in that field. So I did industrial physiotherapy. So I worked in factories and in manufacturing plants to work with ergonomics and, chronic pain and repetitive strain injuries. And I was really unhappy doing that because I knew there was more to healing than, prescribing exercises or fixing the way they were doing things. And you would have two people working in the same workstation, but one person would be, debilitated from back pain, and then the person beside him was totally fine. And it was always curious to me how one person could do so well and another didn't. And so from there, I was exposed to osteopathy from going to a clinic. Out of the blue, this is kind of a long story, but out of the blue, I applied for a job at a physio clinic. She was someone I saw her name when I was pregnant with my with my son. And I saw her ad in the newspaper a few years later, and I went, oh, that's interesting. That was the name I looked at all the time when I went to visit the gynecologist or the OB/GYN. And she was looking for a physiotherapist to join her practice. So I don't know why. I had a job and I wasn't really looking for another one, but I felt this urge to call the clinic. And I ended up meeting with her, and she was in osteopathy at the time, in her third year. And I was totally fascinated with the whole process. And then what finally pushed me over the edge to apply for school was that one of her professors treated my son, who was diagnosed with asthma at the time. He was 18 months old. And I watched him treat Nicholas, and I was like, wow, this is weird and crazy. And Nicholas was not liking it. He was crying the whole time, but that he never had to use the puffer after that again. And so I was totally sold. I mean, it took me another couple of years before I actually signed up, but that was what did it.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious about kind of like the journey getting into osteopathy. Like you said, it took you a couple of years. What did it actually look like when you actually went to school for that and then started weaving that into what you do?
Right. Yeah, it took a couple of years to decide because I knew it was a big, long road. At the time, there was only one school in Canada. Well, there was one school in Canada, but two campuses, one in Montreal and one in Toronto. And the program was designed for healthcare practitioners already. And it was 5 years of school where you went, and I live an hour north of Toronto, so I had to go downtown Toronto 5 days a month for 5 years. And my kids were young at the time. They were like 6 and 3. So it was a huge decision about whether or not, plus the finance and how it was going to impact on my full-time job. But yeah, so I did, and it was 5 years to do that. And then you had 2.5 years to do your thesis. But because it was designed for people who were already in the healthcare profession, I was able to implement the techniques right away. And I used it on all my patients. And because I worked in an industrial setting, they were lovely. They knew me, and they had no problem with me having my books all out there. Like, okay, I'm going to practice this on you today. And what always was amazing was, even though I was far from perfect in knowing what to do, the changes were made like almost instantly, which was such a far cry from what I had been doing before, where I really relied on them to do the exercises and follow what I said and practice ergonomics and all that. But with osteopathy, I didn't have to do that. Like, just by making changes in them, that gave them the motivation to do follow-up things like a home program or exercise or whatever. And so that was what was amazing to me right from the get-go.
Yeah, that's super cool. And just for people who are maybe not familiar with osteopathy, is there like kind of like a definition of it?
Mm, that's a good question. I always laugh because patients will come to me and say, well, I was telling my husband what you do, and basically, I don't know what you do really. You put your hands on me and there. And I'm like, yeah, I know. My parents still don't know what I do really. So in a nutshell, osteopathy is kind of the grandfather of all manual therapy. Actually, chiropractic medicine, for example, has its roots coming from osteopathy. I'm sure your listeners have heard of craniosacral therapy. That comes from osteopathy. Visceral manipulation, that comes from osteopathy. So it's sort of the grandfather of all these manual therapy techniques that we are familiar with in present day. In a nutshell, osteopathy is a philosophy of treatment. It believes that the body has all the resources and all the necessities to heal itself. And as an osteopathic manual practitioner, our job is to figure out what's blocking that person from fully accessing their ability to heal. And we look at everything. We look at their physical body, we look at their fluidic body, we look at their emotional body, and we look at their energetic body, and then beyond that. So it's, as a human being, we're very complicated, right? We're not just bones and muscles, but that's what we feel. That's where we feel it. And that gives us a clue in osteopathy of where we go from there. But we look at the whole person.
Yeah, 100%. That's really great. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something that I've seen kind of like popping up more and more over the last couple of years. And I love that it's more, I guess, like holistic and kind of looking at like all the different elements of the body. Because often I find when I have something going on, I'm like, okay, I need to see like my doctor, like my GP, my physio person, my naturopath, maybe go get a massage. It's like kind of looking at all these different modalities to try to figure out what's going on. And it sounds like with osteopathy, maybe you can kind of do all of that or some of that kind of just in one go. Is that right?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, in Canada, osteopathy is very different from how it is set up in the United States, for example. I always say to people, I mean, in my own practice, I guess, the people that end up coming to me are the people, like what you said, they've gone to everybody, right? They've gone to the doctors, they've gone to the physios, chiros, whatever. And they come to me at the point where nothing really has helped or nothing has helped for long periods of time. And so I guess in some ways, it's easier for me, right? Because they've gone to the doctors, they've had all the test results looked at, they've had everything investigated, they've gone to physio, they've done the exercises, they've looked at nutrition with the naturopath. And so for me, it's like a matter of putting all the pieces together. And so in some ways, it's easier. Not everybody's like that comes into my practice, but those are the ones that I enjoy working with because I feel like I'm a little detective trying to put all the pieces together. In the States, however, they are called osteopaths in the States. In Canada, we don't use that title because it's protected by other colleges. But in the States, they are medically trained osteopaths. So they go through medical school. So they can do things like diagnose and invest and order up investigations and rule out, the bigger things. So it's a little bit different how they approach osteopathy down in the States. What we practice up here in Canada is what they call traditional osteopathy, using manual therapy to be able to figure out what's going on and also to treat.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for explaining the difference between Canada and the US. That's super interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And I'm curious in general, like what types of people do you normally see? Like, what are they coming to you for?
Well, huge range, but the vast majority, I guess I would put them under the umbrella of chronic pain. So they're the ones who've had pain for, the official definition of chronic pain is over 3 months. or 12 weeks. So those are the kind of people I tend to have. They're usually the more odd symptoms, right? Like they don't really, they're more the syndromes. They don't fit anything particular, or it's very generalized. So someone will come in with low back pain, and they might on paper present like most people with low back pain. They've had a history of herniations, or they had an injury or a car accident or what have you, but they're not healing, right? They've done the whole rehabilitation route. They've gone to specialists. They've had injections. They've had all kinds of medication, but they're just not getting better. So I guess that's the majority of my client load. But I do get, I treat lots of babies, for example, and I have right now, a huge population of patients who are pregnant, COVID babies. So I enjoy doing that as well. So prenatal care. There's a saying in osteopathy that once you treat a mom, you treat generations to come, because how the mom is and how her health is and how the baby comes into the world will affect the baby's life and his lifetime, and then down the road from there. So I love that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that too. And so if somebody is coming to you, like say it is a pregnant mom, is it because she's having like back pain or something like that?
Yeah, sometimes it's because they have back pain. Sometimes it's like a lot of my patients who are like current patients, they'll come to me sort of as preparation for birthing, for example, and to ensure that they heal timelier afterwards. So a lot of those. Some symptoms like pain, very common to have headaches, for example, when they're pregnant, swelling, not being able to sleep, digestive problems, all of the lovely things that come with being pregnant, right? So trying to deal with those symptoms as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you can kind of work with all of that. I feel like if I was thinking about digestion, I'd be like, oh, I should go see my naturopath. I mean, and obviously I know that the whole body is like interconnected. So it makes sense that, something can be going on with one aspect of the physical body that's affecting, the emotional body or something like that. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about, you mentioned like the different bodies that you work with. Can you talk a little bit about like how you work with those, what you look for, and then how you treat people?
Sure. So one of the biggest principles in osteopathy is that the structure governs function, which means that our body is the container, right? And if our containers are distorted in any ways or not optimally working in any ways, it's going to affect the contents of which it's holding on to. So, for example, your digestion is held in the abdominal area. So if there's anything going on with your low back, there's a nervous system input that goes from the low back to the digestive tract, as well as the fact that the digestive tract is held in an area and suspended to the bones that make up the low back. So if there's something going on with the low back, it's going to affect the connective tissue that holds the intestine, for example, and then that's going to affect its function. As well as, with the digestive tract, there's that nerve that starts in the head. It's called the vagus nerve. So that's affected by the emotions, right? If we're stressed, that is going to impact on that particular nervous system, and therefore it's going to affect digestion. If we're going through changes, for example, the body has to be able to adapt to changes. So the changes could be weather changes, barometric changes, so that's physical, but it could also be changes like that's going on in your life. And your body has a way of being able to adapt to changes. One of those ways is the nervous system. Another way is the digestive system. And another way, it's our emotions, which will then interplay into all of those other systems as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to think about, though. It's like, I think sometimes I think about these parts of the body as like sort of separate, even though, like I said before, I do know that they're connected, but it's really fascinating to think about like the bones and the muscles in the back, for example, being connected with the digestive system. And if something's off with either, it can cause, something to be off with both, essentially. That's really interesting.
So think about when you're stressed, right? Or if you're fearful of something, where do you feel it? Like you feel it, for most people, they feel it either in their gut, right? That they call, or the solar plexus area, or they feel it in their chest. But either way, there is some visceral sensation, like you feel it in your body somehow. It could be a tightening, or it could be like a pressure, but it's your body's reacting to your emotional state, which is reacting to what's happening in your outside world. So all of that is interrelated, and we don't take that into consideration. So for example, if you come in with low back pain, and I didn't ask you, and I didn't know that you have some major life changes going on, and I keep treating your low back, I'm not really getting to the source of it, which is how you're reacting to what's happening to you in the external world, right? Whatever was going on in your life at that time. And that's what I found when I was purely practicing as a physiotherapist. Like, I would give these exercises to people, not really taking into consideration what was happening in their life. Now, I mean, as you treat patients, you get to know them, right? And then you're kind of putting two and two together, going, okay, well, they're going through a really hard time right now. And could there be a correlation to what they're experiencing? And there is, but in osteopathy, I use that information as part of the treatment and really kind of work backwards from there, right? Like understanding that, okay, this is what's going on in their life. What can we do in their bodies? What can we do with their emotions? What can we do, with their nervous system to A, cope with what's going on in their life, but also B, help their body cope with what's going on in their life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. So a part of, like, say I came to see you for something. So a part of the treatment would actually be having a conversation about like what was going on in my life to kind of figure out, like, is there a root cause of some of the pain that I'm experiencing?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if I never met you before and you came into my office, my initial assessment usually takes about 45 minutes. And I ask everything. Like, I ask about, obviously why you're here to see me and what symptoms you're experiencing. We go through each of your systems, right? Like, what's going on with your head, what's going on with your heart, your lungs, your digestion. And then, I always ask about stress and sleep and nutrition, because it all plays a part in everything, right? Whether or not it's the direct root cause, it's definitely part of the piece of the puzzle that we have to kind of figure out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That makes so much sense to me. And I love thinking about it as like a piece of the puzzle, as in like, we can't just have one piece and assume we have like all the answers. I like the idea of kind of like being able to piece it all together with all the different systems, because I feel like if I've learned like anything about the body over the last decade, it's been that, you can have pain in your body because of an emotional experience that you're not processing, or digestion can be off because of stress, and et cetera, et cetera. There's so many examples. And so I like the idea of being able to kind of look at all of these things to actually figure out what to treat.
Yeah, exactly. And the big difference with osteopathy too, and I guess with any really holistic healthcare, is that what makes us, I guess the starting point of when I look at a patient isn't to look at, oh, okay, well, she's standing crooked here, or she's, out of balance here, or whatever. Is to see that person has health within them already, right? They always say that as long as you have your last breath, you still have the potential to express health. And the guy who started osteopathy, his name was Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. He has a very famous quote that says, and I don't know exactly the quote, but basically, our job is to find health in someone, because anyone can find disease. Anyone can say, oh, well, you're tight there, or, you're not standing properly, or you're bent over or whatever, but it's to look at that person and to be able to see that health within them and help them express the health.
I love that. That's amazing. I thank you so much for sharing that. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the show to talk about Energy Bits. Energy Bits are spirulina tablets made of one ingredient, algae. Nothing added, nothing subtracted, just 100% plant-based algae nutrition. No sugar, no caffeine, no gluten, no soy, no additives, no GMOs, no preservatives, no binders, nothing artificial. Just 100% algae, 100% green, 100% healthy, and 100% pure. Pure and simple, the way food should be. They have high protein, high beta carotene, high iron, high chlorophyll, high antioxidants, and over 40 plus vitamins, including the B vitamins. They have electrolytes, including magnesium, potassium, and are a great source of essential fatty acids. Honestly, I could go on and on and on about how great Energy Bits are for you, and that's why I've decided to partner with them. If you want to learn more about Energy Bits or order some yourself, you can head on over to energybits.com to learn more. Use the code WANDERBARN to get 20% off your order. Once again, that's energybits.com and use the code WANDERBARN for 20% off your order. All right, back to the episode. And I would love to get into a little bit, Kathy, your journey with yoga, because I know that yoga has also been an important journey with your modalities that you teach and practice and all of that. Where did that kind of come into play for you?
Well, I started yoga in my 20s. Like most people, I was trying to run, actually. I was learning how to run and my leg was hurting. And I knew, being a physio, while I was in physio school at the time, I needed to stretch. And like most people, I didn't like to stretch. I'd rather just run. And so I signed up for a yoga class at the university that I was at. And I remember going, oh, like, I really need to stretch. Like, I'm super tight. And unfortunately, that class got canceled because there weren't that many of us. So then I really actually liked it so much because it was the only way I could stretch that I went to a yoga studio, which this was in 1991, basically. And there weren't a lot of yoga studios around. But I found one when I came home. When my mom was sick, I came home and I went to a studio in Toronto. And I had this lovely older woman teaching yoga. And it was amazing because it was so different from the yoga class I did at the YMCA at the university. And she really brought in the philosophy of yoga in her teachings. And I absolutely fell in love. And at that point, there wasn't an internet and there was no major bookstores around. So it was hard, but I found yoga resources and got my hands on any book that I could get. And I started searching for yoga teachers at that time. And so that's been my personal practice all these years. And then when I was getting really frustrated working with my chronic pain patient population, I would start incorporating some of the yoga teachings, right? At first, it was purely looking at doing specific exercises and asanas and making sure that, they knew how to stretch properly, incorporating breath, all of that. And it was working. Like it was much more effective. And the side effect was they were feeling better, right? Like they felt lighter. They would feel, releases. And this was pre-osteopathy. So I didn't really have any way to explain to them what they were feeling other than, okay, well, if it's working for you, that's awesome. And then as I delved more into osteopathy and I had opportunities to work with more yoga teachers, and somewhere along there, I got my yoga teacher training as well. I really incorporated the yoga philosophy into my practice because of that whole mind, body, spirit connection. And yoga gave me a tool and yoga gave me a reference point to be able to use that to help my patients. So it was sort of like this long journey coming in, and I've always infused it into my teachings, and I didn't actually realize it until I had a couple of students work with me, and they're like, where did you learn that? Like, I don't remember doing that in school, in osteo school. Like, where did you learn that? I'm like, oh, okay, no, that's all part of my yoga training. And so, yeah, so that's how it all came together.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting to hear that because as you've been talking about osteopathy, it sounds like it kind of uses some of the principles of yoga, like this idea that everything's interconnected, that the body, mind, spirit is, kind of one thing. Yet in the yoga teacher world, teachers are trained for 200 hours, maybe 500 hours if you decide to do that. And obviously don't have like the type of training in terms of hands-on or anatomy that an osteopath would have that you have. Yet I love that you were able to bring from the yoga world some of these principles of breath work and mindfulness into your practice, because I do feel like those are so important. Like obviously the movement aspect is really important. And I think moving our bodies every day, at least once a day, is super, super important for good health and longevity. But this idea of like being able to breathe deeply and being able to connect with our breath and be mindful and meditation and stuff is so powerful, especially over the long term. And I think it's really awesome that you've been able to like bring that into the work that you're doing with osteopathy.
Yeah, thank you. I 100% agree. I look at yoga teachers and I have a lot of them in my practice, and like you have so many amazing tools right there, and they're simple tools, right? Like they don't need to be complicated. And somehow, even in the osteo world, we've made things so complicated, and yet the truth is truth, right? That's why it melds so nicely. Basically, that we just have to get out of our own ways, and our body can heal itself. But we get in our own way, whether it's our thoughts or our physical obstacles, like whatever, like tightness or injuries or misalignment, or our thoughts in the same way, misalignment, blocks, all of those things. We just have to get out of the way, and then the body can take over.
Yeah, for sure. I think like in everything I've ever learned, like between yoga and then some courses I've taken around like hormones, and then I'm in an Ayurveda training right now. It's like the body wants to be in balance. Like it always is trying to go back to homeostasis. And I have a friend who's in school for osteopathy right now. And when I was talking to her a little bit about it, she was saying like, it's this idea that like the body will do what it needs to do to get back into homeostasis. But so often we're not like allowing it to actually get there, or we're not helping it actually get there. And it's interesting to think about the fact that like our bodies really do have kind of everything they need to heal.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that homeostasis is exactly what it is, but not just in a physical sense, right? In yoga, they talk about the gunas, right? Like we're always trying to find sattva. I mean, sometimes we have to stir things up, and sometimes we have to be more restful. But it's actually knowing when to do what. That's the art. That's the art of healing, right? And being able to apply the necessary things to allow the body and the mind to find that homeostatic position or place.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I experienced that like a little bit in my own life, going through like a journey with my hormones. And I was kind of in a position where I wasn't like cycling regularly, and I was just working out like crazy. I was super stressed at work, and I was just kind of ignoring that, the fact that I like didn't like my job and stuff. And I was just, I was trying to eat healthy, but I wasn't like eating enough. And I kind of came out of that being like, oh, I thought I was doing all these things really right. Like working out every day, pushing myself really hard, eating I wasn't eating like enough, I guess, but I thought I was eating really healthy for myself, and recognizing that like my body was giving me all the signs of like, you're pushing me too hard. You need to eat a little bit more. And then we can like do what we're meant to do, if that kind of makes sense. And
That
figuring
totally
that out
does.
after, I was like, oh, it was telling me this whole time, and I just needed to listen.
Yes, well, that's exactly it, and that's the beauty of yoga, and that's what I bring into my practice a lot with my own patients. Is that we are inundated with information now, right? Like anybody can, I would call it Dr. Google, patients will come in, they're like, oh, I read. I'm like, okay, you Dr. Googled it. And they'll have all this information of how to help themselves. But in reality, it's all in them, right? They just have to quiet down, be quiet, and listen to what their own bodies need. In science, they call that interoception, which is the body's ability to know what it needs. So when you're thirsty, you know when you have to go drink water, right? Or when you're hungry, you know how to do that. But even that is overridden in how we live our lives now, right? We're too busy. Or so-and-so told us this, or I went to this practitioner and they said that, or I Googled this information. And instead of looking inside us to see what we need, we spend a lot of time searching on the outside. But what that does is it creates, well, in yoga, they call it rajas, right? It creates this fury all around, and we can't settle, we can't figure things out. And in the body, it creates a lot of stress. And then it affects things like your nervous system, your hormones, your digestive system, and whatever else. So it's a matter of really just quieting everything down, learning all the things that we know to quiet, to come inwards, and then the body tells you. It has all the wisdom in there.
Yeah, 100%. I really love that. It's been so interesting in my Ayurveda training that I'm in right now. It's like so much of what we talk about, especially around women's health, is like how, exactly like you said, like how inundated we are with information and this idea that we need to be like hustle, 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 busy, busy, busy. And we're kind of like we're losing the ability to listen to our body when it tells us to rest, because we think about rest as this thing that we shouldn't do. Like, oh, it's not going to be like prided in society if I'm resting right now. And especially as a woman, it's so important to have that, because those are those moments where, we really allow ourselves we allow ourselves, our bodies to heal. And we also are able to like actually tune into our minds at that point, which is pretty beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And just by honoring that and really listening, you can do so much more, right? Like there's an efficiency in that. And this is what I tell a lot of my patients too. A lot of them are, the high achieving, like high performance, busy people. They just want this quick fix. And really by not looking for the quick fix, it's there. If you know what I mean, if that makes sense at all, right? Like I always say to them, okay, you're spending all this time and energy and money trying to fix something, but really your body's trying to tell you to let it all go. And when you do, it does fix itself. Like that's the paradox. And until they experience it, that's part of the journey.
Yeah. My husband and I were just talking about, it was yesterday or the day before, just this idea of like, in society, it's like, we want internet browsers to load really fast. We're frustrated if our computers are slow. I know I was experiencing that yesterday. And then we were talking about how in society, we're so programmed to like, oh, you have a headache, you take an Advil, you feel better right away. You've got like that Advil liquid gels that really take your pain away in like, 30 seconds type thing. We have like prescription medication that will take like pain and different things away, which can be a beautiful thing, but it's kind of programmed us to this, like anything that's not a quick fix, we don't really want to do. And how for so many of us, like our daily quote unquote medicine it can be as simple as like sitting in silence for, 5, maybe more minutes, maybe doing a bit of journaling, maybe doing a bit of breath work, doing a bit of movement. And that is medicine. Yet instead we have ailments and we kind of turn to like, okay, what prescription can I take to make this go away so I don't have to deal with it? It's a really interesting sort of thing that we have in our world.
I know it's interesting, and it's very harming. It's amazing to see. I mean, I've been in my practice now for over 25 years, and I've seen how there's this frenzy of that instant relief and and wanting more. Like and part of what I work with my patients is like, no, you don't need more. When I first started, I would spend hours writing out exercise programs and back then we didn't have computers. So I would draw out pictures and write instructions and give them all these pages of work to do. And they never did it. Right. And nowadays, I literally, every patient that comes in, I give them Tadasana. That is my very first thing I give them. And with Tadasana, I teach them how to biomechanically stand properly. And in there, I introduce all the principles of Patanjali, right? This is how you look after yourself for the yamas. And this is how you breathe for the pranayama. And this is how you stand for asana. And then I teach them how to come inwards and focus. And it's always amazing because those who have been with me for a while, they do it all the time now, which is fantastic. And really, it's not all that I give them, but it's a big part of what I give them in different layers and depths. But the people who first come and see me, they're like, that's it? Are you going to give me more? I'm like, nope, that's it. I mean, show me that you can do this and show me that you use this tool because it's a wonderful tool, but they want more. And yet if you give them more, they wouldn't do it. And then they're stressed because they're not doing it. And I laugh because it's like, we think we want more, but really if we just keep to the simple things and do it, we'll get what we need and we'll get the healing.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the idea of like something simple, but yet as, these programmed humans that we are, we want more and more and more. It's not surprising at all.
I know. I'm guilty of that myself too. So in other ways.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, me too. I'm not perfect by any means. The last thing I wanted to talk with you about is I'm curious about kind of how you handle the idea of chronic pain or sort of your thoughts around chronic pain, because I feel like more and more there's people who are just experiencing chronic pain. Like every day they're in pain, they're living in pain. How do you kind of look at that from an osteopathic perspective or an osteopathic lens and work to treat that?
Right. Well, what we know about chronic pain now has come so far in the last 20 years. What we know about chronic pain now is that 100% pain is experienced in the brain. And what that means, and I'll say that to patients and they're like, it's not in my head. I'm like, no, that's not what it means. It just means that how the brain picks up the pain experience is very much involved in chronic pain. And if we don't address that, then the pain can't go away. And chronic pain can go away. People think that they have to live with it forever, and that is not true at all. I've worked with lots and lots of people who've had pain for, a few years to 10 years, and they're able to live a full, happy, satisfying life and get rid of their pain as well. And it does take work, but it's not, most of the time we think the work is what we do, just like what you explained when you were dealing with your hormones. Like you think you have to work harder and that you have to change everything and eat better and all these things. And in fact, that was actually making things worse. Well, very similar in chronic pain. Most people, when they come in to see me, they have a schedule that is like a full-time job. They have physio 3 days a week. They have chiro twice a week. They go to a specialist. They get injections once every 2 weeks. And like their schedules are busier than mine. It's amazing. And they're constantly looking for more, right? It's like the same thing. They're looking for more to do to try to fix it. And in doing that, they're actually increasing their chronic pain because they're increasing the stress response in their bodies. So one of the first things we work on is really teach the patient that they have to let things go and really, and it's amazing when you tell them. You would think if you tell them, you know what, if you do less, you'll feel better, they would feel better, but they don't. They're actually scared. They're actually scared that if they don't keep the schedule up, they will have more pain. And so part of my job is to try to reassure them and convince them that they really have to do less. And then from there, we teach them how to listen to their bodies and listen to the signals that tell them what they need to do, not what they think they need to do in terms of, filling their life full of activities and treatments, but what they really need. And that's where I bring in the yoga for sure, is really quieting everything else down so that they can really hear what they need to do. Do they need to do some movements today, or do they need to rest? Do they need to eat certain foods because that's what's going to give them energy, or they need to let go of some of that. And really teaching them to trust themselves. And once they do, pain gets better.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I love the idea of making simple changes, learning to trust yourself, which is so huge. Like,
Yeah.
Sure, you can use Dr. Google or see different health practitioners and whatnot, but really trusting yourself, like learning to tune into what's going on in your body so you can advocate for that with the people that you're working with, I think is so important for healing.
Exactly. It is. Definitely. We need to all just, we live in a very stressful world right now, and that alone keeps the pain going. And if we can just give ourselves and honor ourselves, allow ourselves to step away from that within ourselves, it goes a long way into healing for sure. And as you heal, all around you will heal, right? And that's the thing I see with people with chronic pain is that their lives are filled with, lovely, right? They have wonderful families and they have jobs that they love, but it's all stress. It's all just trying to do too much, accomplish too much, and really it's not serving them, and it's not serving their families as well. So
yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. I love that. And I've loved this whole conversation. I feel like I could just keep picking your brain all day, but I think here's a good place to wrap things up. Kathy, if people want to learn more about you, where can they go to find you?
Sure. They can find me on my website at kathydegen.com. My clinic is thrivetherapeutics.ca, and that's in Barrie, Ontario. And yeah, I'd love to hear from people. That'd be great.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.